Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. And we're very happy that you can join us for today's session of Meet the Methodologist. It is November 19th, 2010, and we're very happy to be here with Richard Priem and Bob Gephart and Rick DeShon. And they're here for their webcast lectures that they're going to be giving later on this afternoon that are offered as part of the CARMA Consortium webcast program. So, first of all, fellas, let me welcome you to CARMA and to Wayne State and to Detroit, Michigan.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry.
So, let me begin with the question that I usually start with, which gets at how you got interested in research methods and the topic of your webcast. So, we'll vary the order. Rick, would you kind of take the lead and start off on this?
Sure. It's a hard question for me. The short answer, I guess, is that I have substantive research questions that I would like to answer as best I can, and that requires some methodological knowledge. So, in a sense, my substantive research questions lead me to look for new ways of analyzing my data that I think are more appropriate or better than what's currently going on, and that drives my work, my interest in my research into developing new methods, evaluating existing methods, and driving off there. So basically, my substantive questions and frustrations with the way they're currently being answered drive me towards new research methods.
Okay, Bob, how about you?
Well, I guess my interest in methods sort of came about because I found as an undergraduate psychology student that I was more interested in the actual doing the lab studies and so on than I was understanding some of the theory and so on behind it. So I found myself being as interested in the research process as the products or the antecedents. And I guess my interest in my topic today, which is ethnostatistics, came about when I was in a PhD program, and I found that I had a lot of questions about the use of statistics and the assumptions that people were making when they used them. And I found that there was really no source of good answers about those kinds of questions, and not too many people asking them in the same way. So that led me to kind of, again, focus on the research process aspects and to look at issues related to the thing I'll talk about today, ethnostatistics.
Okay. Richard, how about you?
Well, for me, essentially, it was problem-driven. I wanted to know some things initially about chief executive officers' judgment policies for making big decisions. And over time, it expanded into just pure judgment policy research and how that can be used at the macro level, at the micro level, and across levels as well. So my interest is driven by the problem.
Yeah. Bob, how about you start off on this next question? Did you have a favorite research methods course that you took as a graduate student, and if so, why that particular one?
I guess, well, it had several, but one I remember in particular was a sociology class from a fellow named Sandy Labovitz, who's a very, very good sociological methodologist, and he actually did some pioneering studies assessing effects of measurement and precision and so on, and in research methods, and so I found he was very inspirational. And then when he passed away, when I was just starting my PhD program, I found it kind of inspired to kind of follow up on his line of research. So that was.
Yeah. Richard, would you like to share with our viewing audience your thoughts on that?
Sure. For me, my favorite course was an experimental design course, and I took it in the psychology department at the school, and we calculated for these poor little white rats who were given various types of drugs and so on, how that would affect their trip through the maze. But particularly what I liked about it was looking at all the different designs that you could develop and the repeated measures aspect. This was essentially an ANOVA course where we actually calculated expected values by hand and all this kind of jazz. And for me, I learned more in there about research design, whether it's experimental or quasi-experimental, than I did in, I think, any other course.
Rick, how about you?
Well, I wish I could say I had a favorite course. I didn't. None of them really stand out in my memory. I had one course that I took with a teacher that I liked very much, but the course wasn't all that great. I'm a big proponent of learning by doing, and I think that It's frustrating when I teach in my methods courses now. I think students learn when they have a problem, and they try to tackle that problem on their own. And that's where the majority of my learning came from, is having problems and trying to address those problems, and then doing the background research that you need to do to be able to address the problem in reasonable ways. And so I didn't come out of my methods courses feeling like I learned a lot. I knew expected mean squares and
Sure.
I knew designs, but I didn't have an intuitive feel for how they applied to my problems. And until I started really addressing the research problems I have, I don't think I understood or appreciated the complexities and the usefulness of those methods. And so, no, I don't think I learned that much in my methods courses. That might be more my fault than the course's fault.
Richard, as you think back about your graduate student days, were there any particular challenges you faced in learning about research methods as a student?
Boy, I'll tell you, that's kind of a tough one. I think I identify with what Rick's saying a little bit. I might have done it backwards in the sense that I studied all these designs and so on, and then as a research question would spring to my mind infrequently, I would say, how can I apply what I had learned previously? And that's kind of what did it for me, basically. So developing the research questions, that's, in my view, the key thing.
Yeah. Bob, how about you?
Well, I guess the research challenges I saw, I was an undergraduate major in psychology at Michigan State, and so there's actually quite a lot of access to quantitative methods, but my interest was also in qualitative methods. And so although I did so basically I had to learn them myself, and I was kind of interested in them, and so I actually did like one of these special readings courses in fourth year and wrote a paper, did an ethnography of student protest movement. Originally started out looking at Children of God, religious group, and so, but because of this, I had then read a lot of the early participant observation and so on methodology literature, just so I'd have a sort of background for what I was doing. So I guess the challenge for me was that finding the stuff I needed to find and then doing it on my own to a certain extent, because you couldn't really get courses at the time in the qualitative methods area. At least I didn't find any. So,
Rick, how about you?
The challenge that I face is that methods is hard. You have to know a lot to be able to comprehend what people are trying to tell you about how to do it well. And so psychology students don't have great math backgrounds. I was a psych undergrad. I had calculus, and I didn't like it. I didn't understand how I would use it. And so when I started getting interested in methods and trying to understand what these methods were doing, it was just terrifically hard to plow through the math and get to the core of the idea of what you really needed to understand the math was doing, and then to develop the mathematical background. So the challenge was it was really, really hard. It still is very hard. And so the more I get into it, the more math I develop, the more math expertise I develop, and the easier it becomes, and the more I'm familiar with the ideas, the easier it becomes. But even today, it's still very hard. But it's worth it. I'm very happy I invested that time, but it's hard work. It's slogging through it all.
Did you have a particular favorite research methods book or a statistics book that influenced you greatly or that you rely upon currently?
No. I don't know if this is a good... I even hesitate to say this, but my approach is to read as widely as possible. So when I come up with a problem, a research methods problem, I get every source that I can find that could be relevant to that problem. And I skim. I look for patterns. I try to find consistency where people are saying the similar things, and I look for where they're saying different things. And I try to I look for this pattern of inconsistencies and consistencies between the different sources, these experts. And I think that the consistencies give you some confidence that you can move forward in useful ways, and the inconsistencies show you where you could contribute in research methods in trying to resolve whatever it is that underlies the inconsistency. So I don't have a favorite. One thing I would say is the things that benefited me the most in my learning were text in the 50s. I think a lot of the text in the 50s, like Chaffee's ANOVA test, Savage's work on Bayesian decision making, they were written at a level where they were focused on a particular question and didn't obscure it with a lot of mathematics. And so a lot of the understanding research methods today is hard, partly because they assume you know a lot of things and you understand why we're doing these things, whereas in the 50s they laid the foundations out and they gave you the reasons for all these different things. And so when I get stuck and I have trouble moving forward, I always go back to the 50s. 55 and 56 were gorgeous for research methods, everything actually.
Yeah.
And so that's when I get stuck, I find a textbook in the 50s, and I always can find my way out working forward from the 50s. 1955, 1956.
Bob, how about you? Favorite book?
Well, I mean, early in my career, I was very influenced by one was actually a qualitative methods study called The Outsiders by Howard S. Becker, but it's an ethnography, and he'd actually done it for his master's thesis, and so I was very inspired as an undergrad seeing that people that young could do it. And I guess in terms of actual methodology book, would be just an early book that I can't remember the actual editors, but it was called Participant Observation, and it's a classic, and it was probably I think published in the early 1960s. So that was one that I still actually refer to and cite sometimes.
Yeah. Richard, how about you? Favorite book?
Well, I'm gonna go with the 50s. You actually just jogged my memory. I like this non-parametrics book by Siegel.
Absolutely.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a great book. Yeah.
It's a great book, and it's simple,
Yep.
and you can go through and you can
Exactly.
figure out what I need to do and so on.
Yep.
Now, to be honest, in strategy, there's not a lot of support for
Yep.
non-parametrics.
I'm not surprised. Yep.
But nevertheless, I think that's really good. More generally, I like this sort of holistic stuff and the Cook and Campbell quasi-experimentation
Yep.
and
Sure.
so on. I can always go back to that and learn something. So yeah.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit here and get into take advantage of your experiences as reviewers of papers in your substantive areas. And I wondered if you would each comment on what you see as the most kind of frequent problems or limitations and shortcomings of the papers that you review, whether it's in terms of theory or in methods and analysis. Richard, I think if you want to start, we'll work our way backwards.
Okay, well, I'm absolutely happy to start. And this may be macro-specific or strategy-specific, but construct validity is huge for us, okay? And more you see papers where folks do a really good job with the math and so on, and but doggone it, the construct is not what they've laid it out to be. And I mean, to give you a real quick example, one of the really neat sort of conceptual concepts is the idea of CEO career horizon, okay? And the general drift is the closer the CEO gets to exit, behavior is going to change. Okay, this makes absolute sense. Two issues, however. Issue number one is now CEOs, on average, are only around for like 4 1/4 years. So they're not looking a lot at career horizon sort of stuff. And the second thing is it's operationalized in the literature as 71 minus the CEO's age. Okay. Now, from my experience way back as a little junior statistician, it says, if you subtract something from a constant, it makes no difference, right? And the particular thing with this is it's confounded then with age, and there's a huge literature on how age affects risk taking and so on and so forth. And so I sort of cringe when I mean that's just one example of something that's published in the top journals. There's a lot of stuff you get where there are huge. Well, I mean, that's pretty huge, but where there are huge problems with construct validity as well. And how I always feel is it's a shame that somebody didn't focus on that aspect more, okay, as much as they did maybe some of the other aspects.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob, how about you?
Well, I guess the two things that I find most common maybe, one is simply the logic of the paper. And it's really, you read a paper sometimes and it's kind of like, okay, how are you getting from this statement to the next one, to the next one, to the next one? So I find it very difficult sometimes to see the underlying logic of things, and so the argument seems to me weak or sometimes specious. And I guess the other thing is simply method sections, which at least for qualitative research, which is mostly what I review, it's almost become a cookie cutter thing where we did a grounded theory study, we we used or we sampled until we reached saturation. There's the same 2 citations and so on. And I'm always challenged to try to get the reader to sort of show me how they get from their actual data to the sorts of insights that they're gleaning, and show me the sort of steps along the way, if you will, on how one issue is becoming related to another. So I think one of the things that's more challenging is to get people to not so much give a stylized overview of qualitative methods, but to be relatively specific just about what they did to get where they are. So that's one of the things that's a kind of a constant challenge.
Rick, how about you?
I really resonate with the cookie cutter perspective. I think that there's an interesting lifespan to methods, and like when SEM, structural equation modeling, started to become on the scene, and it was really kind of scary, and all this matrix algebra, and how do we do this, and fit statistics, and model identification. And then we hammered out various issues, and then it became just a standard approach. You do this, you do this, you do this, you report these 3 fit indices, you make this conclusion about global model fit. We've done the same thing with HLM, where hierarchical linear models, where at first it was maximum likelihood estimation, level 2 variables were kind of funky, and construct validity issues were crazy. And now we've hammered out a lot of the details, and we feel very comfortable, and now we have a recipe, and we can apply HLM and get these and support, we think, these inferences. But I worry, as I review and as I look at how my students work on this. There's just a model, and in a sense you kind of suspend judgment. You just do this. Whether it really answers your question or not, or whether there's a better way of answering your question that you could have adopted, you just do the model. And then you interpret the parameters that come out of that model rather than thinking about what the model should be or if there are alternative approaches. And so I worry about the routinization of our methodological approaches and the suspension of thought that sometimes occurs when we just do these cookie-cutter approaches to analysis.
Okay. Well, you all, each of you, kind of have the different areas that you track, and I'm wondering if you would comment on the research methods work in your respective areas, and are there things that you think we are doing a particularly good job of investigating with the methods work, not the substantive, but just our understanding and attempts to improve the methods? Are there things that we're doing well or things that we're not doing so well? Anybody want to? Bob?
Okay. Well, I in terms of the methods, I think that the fair number of well done studies and interviews. I think that there are some good field research, and I'm talking qualitative research now, and ethnographic studies. But I think generally speaking, some of the analysis of data and so on is maybe not as well done or as well informed or as refined as it might be. So oftentimes people will go collect the data. They can kind of provide you with sort of, my thematic analysis are the following, here are some themes, but there's really no kind of more systematic or refined analysis of the information there. And people will often say, well, you get overwhelmed with the volume of qualitative data, so you have to reduce. Well, the other thing that I find, often a lot of qualitative papers will report select examples rather than try to work with a complete corpus of data. And I've been sort of arguing, much to the chagrin of some editors in that reporting selective examples is like taking a correlation matrix and taking out the numbers you don't like and looking at the rest. And so I think that there's some need for more systematic, comprehensive, and complete reflection on the data as one develops insights, rather than simply picking some data, coming up with some ideas that are conclusions, and just assuming the reader will assume that there was a relationship and would somehow or other you got there, and that's not important. So I think the analytical process is something I'd like to see opened up a little bit more.
That's great. Richard, what do you think?
Well, continuing on the qualitative side for a minute, I think for the macro folks, we could do more of it. Okay, good, bad, or indifferent. We could absolutely do more of it in a theory building sort of mode, and I think that would improve what we do. On the quantitative side, I think we're getting decent, and some big things like Heckman and endogeneity, was something 10 years ago, and maybe I should have sooner. I couldn't have told you at all what it was, and I think virtually all of our analyses had problems with it. And now, boom, that's almost getting, part of it's the fad or the trend thing.
Exactly.
Now all the time, you didn't correct for endogeneity. Whether you need to or not,
Exactly.
kind of is where we are now. But I think that was nevertheless a nice advance in the way we analyze data.
Yeah. Rick, I don't think you've answered this one, have you?
No, I haven't. It's hard to. There's always limitations on what we're doing well, and so it's hard for me to say what we're doing well, particularly well. I think that we're doing a reasonable job in our structural equation modeling now. I think we're doing a reasonable job in hierarchical linear models. I think that the places, I think we're doing a reasonable job with confirmatory factor analysis approaches with respect to measurement. There are always exceptions where people make mistakes, and that, but overall as a field, I think that we're doing well in those areas. Where I think we're not up to par yet, particularly with respect to economists, is longitudinal data within subjects approaches. I don't think that we really have developed an appreciation of the differences in thinking, the differences in the models, the differences in the estimation for within subjects approaches, and really grappled with model issues of dynamics. So that's an area I think that we could really do much better in, is within subjects and how it all gets mushed together with between subjects or between unit types of issues, which is getting into multi-level types of comparisons, macro and micro. I think that's a real area that we need to work on very hard in the near future.
Okay. You guys probably know that doctoral students are an important audience for our CARMA events, both in terms of the short courses we do and with our webcast program. You all are very successful scholars, and I'd like for you to offer the advice that you would have to share with doctoral students who want to pursue a career as a researcher. Rick, you want to start off on this one?
Sure. I think it's actually very simple. Well, I think one part is very hard and the other two parts are very simple. The two things I think that at least I tell my students is you have to have an extremely thick skin. This job is full of negative feedback, and nothing is ever good enough, and all you get is a review saying how terrible this paper is. And so you have to be able to cope with that and keep your eye, know where you're headed, know what you're trying to accomplish, and learn from the feedback, but don't take it to heart. Don't take it personally. None of us, or at least in my experience, nobody has been immune to the negative feedback. And so you have to have a very thick skin. The other thing is persistent. You just have to keep trying. And if you try hard and you're able to dodge the negative feedback, you will be, I'm convinced you will be successful. The third is a little harder, and that one is you have to ask good questions. And hopefully answer them in reasonable ways. But the question, I think, matters a lot. But I'm convinced that if you have the first two and you don't ask great questions, you can still be very successful. If you have the three, I think you'll be very successful.
Bob, how about you?
Okay, well, I guess the first thing is that something that comes to me from PhD students, which is basically when they start doing things and they'll say, my gosh, this is really hard. It's taking a lot longer than I thought. And so I would say, don't be surprised if it's hard and it takes a long time. People have the expectation these days if they're going to do research, they're going to generate several publications a year. Well, I think that's really, one good solid publication in your career every year would be a really strong career, especially if it's something that's single authored. So the second thing is I think that the issue of then some kind of patience or persistence or keeping going forward. People I often find, and I guess I'm thinking of PhD students, but also academics kind of get a little too deadline driven and wait maybe a little bit too long, and I think it's important to develop programs of research where you're continuously developing ideas as opposed to simply doing papers that are research, although it's kind of always hard and one does get, driven in the wrong directions. And then third, I guess, would be if one wants to be successful at research, at least for myself, I found that many of the ideas that really help within a given field somehow come from outside the field.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges, I think, that's emerged today is people, especially in the management area, will say, well, yeah, this might be known in sociology or psychology, but we can reinvent it again for business or management. And I think that I think it's important to bring these ideas in, but I think reinventing them isn't necessarily needed either. We don't need to reinvent same ideas within the field of management, but we should be much more cognizant of what's outside it. So methodologies, conceptual ideas, and so on from the outside should also be considered as well as things from the in, rather than just simply saying, well, now I have to get that little niche that I can make a contribution in here. Well, what's the broader context? And that will probably advance a research career if you keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Richard? Cool. Well, first, I concur with my colleagues.
Very good.
So let me bring up two other things, because perseverance is clearly hugely important. And having research streams is also clearly super important. I would say a couple things, though. One, when you're starting out, a lot of times it's better to aim for a niche. If you can read all of the research on topic A in 10 papers, in 20 papers, you've got a much better chance as a junior scholar just coming in, as opposed to, well, I'm going to change the total direction of research in this area that's been going on for years, and there's thousands of papers out there. Okay, that's just a practical matter. You can become an expert much more easily. The other thing I'd recommend is whenever you take a seminar, if you walk out of a PhD seminar without at least one research question written down, then that has been a failed seminar. And you should keep track of those, and you're going to see research streams when you notice, oh, all my research questions are sort of aiming in this area. Okay, and within the seminars, and then after you've been doing it a little while longer, across the seminars, and oh yeah, from back last year, now I can make this comparison and so on. And I mean, my experience has been if a student learns how to do that, they will be a successful scholar. If a student is unable to learn to do that, then they might be the methodologist who's on everybody else's papers. Okay, but they're not driving their own research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you each to briefly talk about the origins and give a brief summary of the webcast that you're going to give here this afternoon. Rick, you want to start?
Sure. My webcast and a lot of my research right now is on dynamic models. And I became convinced 4 or 5 years ago, as we were moving towards increased use of longitudinal data, experience sampling approaches, archival data with long time span, that we need to develop a much better appreciation for dynamic processes. You see, and I'll show in my slides later today, an exponential growth in a keyword. If you do a keyword search on dynamics, there's exponential growth in that. There's a lot of interest in it. But I don't know that we're doing a very good job actually modeling the dynamic processes. And so I had a sabbatical, wonderful sabbatical, 3 years ago, and I devoted the entire sabbatical to basically reinventing my methodological knowledge in dynamics. And I read mostly economics and physics and engineering, and tried to develop expertise in this area. And that's one of the, I highly recommend sabbatical. And so I've spent the last 4 years essentially learning this area, learning dynamic modeling, learning what economists mean by dynamic modeling, learning what physicists mean by dynamic modeling, learning stochastic difference equations and stochastic differential equations, and that was fun. But I think that it's necessary for us to really grapple with the key questions that we have as a field about how one variable over time affects another variable, and then that variable in turn influences the same process. And so you get into these cycles of events, and the types of models that we're dealing with right now, these recursive models with structural equation modeling and hierarchical linear modeling, where all the causation goes in one direction, there's no reciprocal relationships, I think are absolutely inconsistent with our theories. And so if we're going to actually test and assess the theories of reciprocal relations and cycles of events that are core to multi-level theory, for instance, I think we have to have this. And so either I've spent 4 years getting ahead of the wave, or I'm going to crash and burn. I'm not sure which is going to be yet.
Yeah.
I think probably the chances of the latter are really pretty small. So. Bob, how about you?
Well, in terms of I'm going to talk about ethnostatistics in the webcast, and ethnostatistics is really, you can view it as either a field or an approach that involves understanding how people actually construct and use statistics, and under the assumption that statistics textbooks themselves are not complete and sufficient discussions of what one needs to do this. And so there really have been three areas looked at in this. One is actually doing ethnographic or observational research on how people actually produce and use statistics. The second involves essentially computer simulations of the underlying assumptions and what happens when you violate them. And the third is an area that looks at statistics as rhetoric, or how is it that statistics in a text help convince you of the truthfulness of the ideas in the text or whatever. And I guess the way that my interest in this came about was, as a PhD student, we were, of course, expected to, actually was taking a statistics class from a statistician that we were required to take, and he was an associate editor of the Journal of American Statistical Association, but I found that a lot of what he was saying to us wasn't really helping most of the people in the room, and so we had to do a series of examinations, a series of papers for him. So I began to test some of the assumptions that I had seen challenged, that wanted to challenge in my own field, and so on. And I also became kind of involved as a qualitative methodologist at a time that there was a lot of tension between qualitative and quantitative, trying to mount a bit of a critique for the quantitative folks to argue that, well, basically you're not generating objective truth quite as simply and easily as you might be claiming to be. So I guess it was my frustrations in being a student in quantitative areas where I wasn't getting the answers, and some of the issues that I wanted to address weren't being addressed, that spurred me on to doing some of the research. And just an interesting aside, when I did a paper that was later published in a very good sociology journal, when I handed in for my class, the instructor gave me like an 86%, and I said, well, isn't this a good paper? Yeah. What do you think could be published? He said, yeah, that's why I give it 86. So I guess the good news was, if you do good research, you can get a reasonably okay grade. If it's published in a top journal, it might be even a little better, but,
Richard, how about you?
That's funny. Yeah, for me, the driving factor, and this goes all the way back to when I was a PhD student, I was trying to answer a simple question, which is, are chief executives contingency thinkers? Virtually all macro theory was contingency theory, and I said, look, does the average CEO think in these contingency terms, or are they universal folks who say, by golly, this is always better? And I had some success examining that in different contexts, not as much as I would have liked, I suppose. But I'm still plugging away with it, and I think judgment policy studies actually can be expanded to a lot more areas just beyond chief executives and so on. And so that's why I wanted to do this webcast, actually.
Good. Well, I want to close by combining two questions, and I'd like for you to comment, if you would, just on a more personal note, kind of what you see as the favorite and the least favorite parts of your work, and do you do anything special to draw inspiration or motivation for your work? Want to come backward, Richard?
Okay, sure. Probably the most favorite is when I work on those things that are really my things, yeah, that are intrinsically driven, that I think are important, where I think it can make a difference. Okay? That's most satisfying. But really, I can expand that and say that anything that offers real and open intellectual stimulation, I think is really nice. So I enjoy being a developmental reviewer. I enjoy mentoring PhD students and so on. I think all that stuff is just great. Least favorite things I'm going to set aside.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
and did you come inspiration?
Oh well, the inspiration or motivation to me comes from the opportunity to make a contribution, and it's not let's count the hits kind of contribution. And sometimes you work with at least I have always worked with my PhD students based on their interests rather than my interests, and so on. But what really gets me in terms of inspiration is the things that I am most I have the greatest affinity for, where I'm thinking, oh gee, it's not so much that you get something in AMJ or AMR, but it will help contribute to the conversation in a way that people might think differently going forward. And that's what really turns me on, basically. Yeah.
Bob, how about you?
Well, in terms of favorite and less favorite, if you will, I guess the parts of research I actually like are I love writing research grant proposals more than actually carrying out the research. Strangely enough, and I actually I find doing the analysis when I've got data to be very good, and I enjoy that quite a lot. Sometimes I find it a bit challenging, literature reviews, especially some areas that have, since I started working them, grown massively. I find that they take up I can spend more time doing a literature review than I would have liked, and so that's something I'm not that fond of. And of course, getting rejection letters isn't that much fun either, But so those are somewhat obvious, but generally I think it's the analysis and so on that drives me. But in terms of what inspires me, and I guess that's maybe a favorite aspect too, would be that I'm often interested in social problems or social issues. I'm not doing problem-driven research as such, but that they inspire me. So I've done fairly lengthy period of time I've been involved in looking at industrial crisis management issues and so on. And for me, that came about one day when basically there was an explosion of a gas that leaked from a pipeline in Edmonton, and someone was seriously burned, and one of my students took up and wrote a paper on this, and it got me very interested because I'd been burned some time ago when I was a in high school student, seriously burned. And so I actually find that taking on issues that have a lot to do with important issues in society inspires me and sort of keeps me going, because you do meet barriers, but it often opens new doors too, because people will say, well, this is a big problem you're looking at. And so that's often very good, although big problems are sometimes hard to bring simple solutions to. I guess reading books and that rather than journal articles sometimes inspires me, because I find I get more interesting stories from them and more wider kinds of set of issues. And then just a kind of a final point, if you've been in the field for quite a while and you've done an awful lot of work and you worked a lot of weeks at it, you sometimes lose your motivation. And I find the way I generally get more motivated is to go do some exercise. And so I'm a triathlete, but I particularly find that if I can go for a swim for an hour or so, then almost any issue I can't tackle beforehand, I can tackle immediately and calmly and effectively afterwards. So I think, you can come in and feel no motivation in the day, but go get some activity in and come back and just feel really energized. So I think that's something that people are maybe a little too sedentary in our field, and that's something that can help keep going.
Rick, how about you?
Favorites and least favorites. The favorites are easy. I like working on trying to solve fun problems, and I like working with smart people. And this is the environment where you get to do both. I can't emphasize how much I like this job. It is you get paid to do the things that you love, and that's wonderful. The least favorite parts are the parts that allow you to do the things that you love. And so I do not like writing grant proposals. I hate it. I hate every minute of it. I'm going to go work on one today. There's a lot of just busy work that gets in the way of working with smart people on cool problems. And you have to do that. But you have to wall it off. This has to be, okay, I'll do this, and you must do it to be successful in this job. But you can't let it interfere with working on cool problems with smart people. And so there has to be a time, extensive focus time, where you're working on cool problems with smart people. And then this other time where you're doing the drudgery that you have to do to be able to do the fun stuff. And the drudgery is just the drudgery, but everybody has to deal with it, and they deal with it in different ways. The motivation, one of the cool problems I'm interested in is motivation, self-regulation, and probably because I'm not very good at it. The inspiration, the motivation for me is a very interesting process, and it changes over the course of my career. And so sometimes I'm just intrinsically interested in this problem. This is just super cool, and I just want to know the answer. And that is very rewarding. You just immerse yourself in the problem, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just extremely satisfying. You lock yourself in your room and you read, and finding time to read now is very, very challenging. But when you find that problem, it's just you need to find an answer for this problem. you find excuses to lock yourself in your room and read and think and have fun. And that is wonderful. And sometimes that's really the driving force for me, the motivation. Sometimes I just get mad at something that somebody else said. I think they're wrong. I think that they're misleading the field, and you get indignant, and I have to fix this problem and show them. And that's not a very lofty motivation, but it gets me going. And so I've had phases in my career where I'm motivated by just cool problems, and I've had too large a phase in my career where I've been motivated by trying to fix a problem that I think has been perpetrated upon our field. And they're both fun. They're just fun in different ways. And so to me, the motives that drive a career change over the course of a career. And I like that about this job very much, that happens.
Well, we are very grateful that you all would take the time from your busy schedule to participate in our webcast program, and also for taking the time to participate in the Meet the Methodologist session. Special thanks to Richard Priem, Bob Gephart, and Rick DeShon, and we're really looking forward to your webcast later today.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks,
Thank
Larry.
you.